Caroline Jean Bessette, a name that, in the 1990s, became synonymous with style, mystery, and understated elegance. She wasn't just featured in fashion magazines. She was the mood, the silhouette, the silence in which the voice of personal style could be heard. But fate, in its cruel irony, cast her into one of America's most haunting modern tragedies, entwined with a family where beauty and power often walk hand in hand with loss. She was born in January of 1966 in White Plains, New York, the youngest of three sisters in a household filled with both affection and high expectations. Even as a child, there was something about Caroline that eluded explanation. A kind of natural grace, a poise that didn't need to be taught. People who met her often spoke of that presence, as if she instinctively knew how to move through the world without ever needing to call attention to herself. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a model. With her looks, it seemed almost inevitable. She posed for her university calendar, hired a professional photographer, and chased the dream. But the fashion world didn't open its doors to her, at least not as a model. Instead, she had the instinct of a designer, an eye for aesthetics that can't be learned. You either have it or you don't. Caroline never feared starting at the bottom. She took a job as a sales associate at a Calvin Klein store in a suburban mall. A simple retail position, but one she handled with quiet determination. It quickly became clear. She wasn't there just to fold clothes. She was absorbing the rhythms of the industry, reading between the lines, sensing future trends before they arrived. Step by step, with calm persistence, she rose to become the company's director of public relations, based in the heart of Manhattan. By then, Caroline had become the woman of her moment. Elusive, recognizable, fiercely independent. She moved in the right circles, spent her nights in iconic clubs, and lived a life that was glamorous but never showy. One of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s friends once said of her, "She was the kind of woman who knew how to be at the center of everything and still never lose herself in the noise." No one knows exactly how they met. Some say it happened in the Calvin Klein offices around 1992. What's certain is that something shifted when their paths crossed. The chemistry between them was immediate. At the time, John was still involved with actress Daryl Hannah, and how that love triangle evolved remains a private story. But from that first encounter, something undeniable connected Caroline with the son of the 35th President of the United States. Their relationship was more than a romance. It was a collision of mythologies, one born in the White House, the other shaped in the shadows of fashion runways and society columns. And before long, it became a national tragedy. A story that fused their destinies into a single, unforgettable American memory. What happened next is a chapter for another time. But one thing is clear: Caroline Bessette was never just John Kennedy's wife. She was her own myth, a woman who moved quietly through the world, and yet left a mark that refuses to fade. In another life, Caroline Bessette Kennedy might have lived quietly, gracefully, elegantly, unbothered by the weight of history. But fate had other plans. One day she met him, John F. Kennedy Jr., the golden heir, America's crown prince, the embodiment of a dream that never quite belonged to just one family. From the moment their eyes met, there was a spark, something invisible, undeniable. And from that point on, nothing would ever be the same. Officially, John was still with Hannah, but hearts rarely follow calendars. Outwardly, he clung to the past until 1994, but inside, something had shifted. His connection with Caroline had already begun to beat with a different rhythm. Some accused her of chasing status and wealth, painting her as calculated, even cold. But those who saw her through John's eyes knew a different story. She had simply fallen in love, perhaps with the most unreachable man in America. After his final split from Hannah, Caroline refused to be just another chapter in his storied life. She waited for him to choose her. Their relationship was turbulent, a cycle of separations and reconciliations, intimacy and distance. They were passionate, then strained, inseparable, yet lost in translation. Their love felt like a storm on calm waters, flashes of light and darkness, tenderness and fatigue. She dreamed of meeting his mother, the legendary Jackie. To Carolyn, her approval would have meant everything. Acceptance, protection, maybe even affection. But that dream was cut short. In May of that same year, 1994, Jackie Kennedy passed away. And with her, the chance for the meeting Carolyn so longed for disappeared. That absence lingered like a shadow over their bond. A shadow filled with grief and unsaid words. But perhaps the hardest part for Carolyn wasn't the man. It was the legacy. She hadn't just fallen in love with John. She had fallen in love with a name, with a dynasty, a living myth. And with it came not just fame, but its curse. Relentless media attention, whispered rumors, imagined scandals. Paparazzi trailed her every step, every glance, every gesture. Her fashion choices became headlines. Her silences became stories that never happened. When she moved into his Tribeca loft in the summer of 1995, she thought she might finally carve out a space for privacy. She was wrong. Photographers camped outside like sentinels of borrowed lives, hoping to capture her in a new coat, with coffee in hand, or best of all, walking beside him, beside John. For Carolyn, this was the price of love. The cost of chasing something close to a normal life with the most abnormal man in America. And though she appeared composed on the outside, inside, she may have been fighting a quiet war for herself, for them, for the right to simply be a woman, not a projection in someone else's daydream. Carolyn's story isn't just one of glamour or tragedy. It's a portrait of a woman who stepped into a whirlwind and tried, against all odds, to remain whole. Even when the whole world was watching, and never looked away. It all began like a fairy tale, dazzling, improbable, almost cinematic. Long before the year 1995, Carolyn Bessette and John F. Kennedy Jr. had already become one of the most talked about couples in America. They were young, striking, and enveloped in a legacy that captivated an entire nation. When news of their engagement broke, it sent shockwaves through the media. Everyone expected the wedding of the century, a grand Kennedy-style spectacle, bursting with opulence, flashing cameras, and tabloid headlines. But they chose a different path. Against every prediction, defying the weight of their famous names and the expectations of an entire country, Carolyn and John quietly slipped away, not from each other, but from the noise. Their wedding took place in secret, inside a tiny wooden chapel on Cumberland Island, Georgia, far from the public eye. It was September of 1996. The stillness of the forest, the warmth of the southern breeze, and the weathered old church became the backdrop for one of the most enigmatic unions of its time. Everything felt effortless and understated, yet in that simplicity, a quiet elegance emerged, one that would later define Carolyn's iconic image.